Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Raz, and in this video we'll discuss about additions to the gross estate. So if ready, let's start. So in our previous two videos, we have discussed already the compositions or the valuation of the properties in the gross estate of the decedent. Particularly, we have discussed real properties, personal properties, usufructuary rights, and the shares of stocks. So there are some items which are not classified among those two or among those properties that have mentioned but are still added in our gross estate. Okay, so here are the items which we should add to our gross estate when computing the estate tax. Number one, there are some transfers which happens or takes place during the lifetime of the decedent but are not subject to donor's tax. In fact, they are subject to estate tax. So as we have mentioned in our past videos, an estate tax is a tax on a transfer that is made upon death of the decedent. However, there are some scenarios or instances or circumstances wherein the transfer is effected during the lifetime of the decedent or donor, but actually these transfers are subject to estate tax. So number one, we have transfer in contemplation of death. Number two, we have revocable transfers. Three, we have transfer passing under general power of appointment. And fourth, we have transfers for insufficient consideration, which applies only to personal properties because real properties are always subject to tax on their higher amount. And fifth, we have the proceeds of life insurance with revocable beneficiaries. So these are the taxable transfers made during the lifetime of the decedent but are still added to the gross estate. Aside from these five items, we also have the other additions to the gross estate. And number one, decedent's interest accrued at the time of death of the decedent. We also have usufructuary right transferable to the decedent's heirs, which we have already discussed under the usufructuary right. And third, we have claims against insolvent persons. And finally, we have amount received by the heirs under the RA 4917. So in this video, we will discuss these these first five items, while the other four items, the other additions, will be discussed in another video. So let's begin with a transfer in contemplation of death. When we say in contemplation of death, it means that the decedent during his lifetime already expects that he is dying. That is the main motive why he would transfer this property during his lifetime. Okay? For example, if a person is getting ill or having a very serious illness with no cure, and he is thinking that maybe he's dying and anytime soon he would be gone. So he would transfer his properties to avoid troubles or disagreements between the heirs. So he would transfer these properties during his lifetime so it would be at ease for him. The thought of dying or the thought of death is the main reason why he is transferring those properties. Hence, it is in contemplation of death. Okay? So death must be contemplated and the thought of death must be the impelling cause of transfer. The following are deemed in contemplation of death transfers. First, where a donation was made concurrently with the execution of the will. When the donation or the gift happens concurrently while making the will, therefore we will add that to the gross estate of the decedent. Second, where donation was made due to the decedent's age and or decedent's known serious illness at the time of the gift. For example, if the donor is having a very serious illness and thought of transferring or giving donations to his heirs, then that could also be an in contemplation of death transfer. And third, where the time between the making of the gift and the death of the donor was relatively close. So, for example, the transfer was made today, then a week after the donor died, then the transfer is said to be in contemplation of death. Okay, so, however, again, the thought of death must be the impelling cause for the transfer. So, for example, on November 10, 2019, due to severe prostate cancer, terminal stage, C donated his land to X, his paramour. A week after, C died. The land, although already in the hands of X, shall be included in the computation of the gross estate of C. So C donated his land to X. And a week after, C died. So C has a severe illness. The date of transfer and the date of death are relatively close. So therefore, this donation, this scenario is deemed to be or is in contemplation of death. Therefore, the fair value of the land at a time of death of C, our decedent, will be included in the computation of the gross estate of C. Okay, that is in contemplation of death transfer. Another, we have revocable transfers. When we say revocable transfers, these are donations or gifts to third persons made by the donor, decedent, but subject to conditions. And such conditions include a stipulation that such donation will be revoked when certain conditions do not happen. Okay? The transfer of property with retention or reservation of the rights over the property by the donor, who is also our decedent, while he still lives. So that is revocable transfer, meaning the donor, who is our decedent, retains the right over the property upon certain conditions while he still lives, or he may revoke such donation on his will. So first, by gift, where the donor has reserved the power to alter, amend, or revoke the donation. Second, the donor retains the option to relinquish such power in contemplation of death. And third, conditional transfers where attached conditions are not completed by the donee prior to the donor's death. Okay, so these are the three scenarios wherein there is a revocable transfer. Number one, when the donor reserved the power to alter, amend, or revoke the donation. For example, if the donor gives a person a gift but with a condition that I can revoke this donation on certain time or upon the non-fulfillment of certain conditions, then that is a revocable transfer. Or let's say the donor gives you a property on a condition that you should pass the CPA licensure examination and the donor dies, then that transfer is also considered a revocable transfer. The key word here is that the donor retained his right over the property despite the fact that the property is already in the hands of another person. The point here is that the donor has a right to take back the property from the hands of the donee upon certain conditions. Example, on June 1, 2021, this year, B gave his car to D, his younger brother, who's going to take the CPA board examination on October 2021. So hopefully, with the condition that when D, his brother, should fail to become CPA within 2 years, the car shall be taken back by him, B. B, however, died on September 30, 2021. So that is actually just a month before the fulfillment or non-fulfillment of the condition. Because who knows, they could either pass or fail the board examination. So in 1 month's time or in 1 month prior to that examination, B died. okay, and goes with him is his right to revoke the transfer to D. Okay, so the transfer is revocable, thus included in the gross estate of B. So, despite the fact that the property, the car, is already in the hands of D, but D has no right or is not the owner yet of the property because the condition is not yet fulfilled. Moreover, death happens before the condition is fulfilled. So therefore, B's ownership over the property, over the car, is still exercisable, and D is not yet the owner until he becomes CPA. Even if D really becomes a CPA on October 2021, but since B is the owner of the property as of the time of death on September 30, then still it will be added to B's gross estate. It will still be added in the gross estate of B, even if D later on becomes a CPA in October 2021. Another addition to the gross estate is a transfer under general power of appointment. A general power of appointment means that the decedent must have a power exercisable in favor of himself, his estate, or creditors of his estate. A power is special if it is expressly not exercisable in favor of the decedent, his estate, or his creditors of his estate. So let's have an illustration about this power of appointment. We have here P died leaving his residential house to his only son M with a will, giving the latter M the condition that should he die M, okay, he can only choose from J, H, and R as the next successor of the residential house. So therefore, in the will of P, there is a condition that when M later on dies, he can only choose between J, H, and R as the next successor and no other third person. He cannot choose A, B, or the other letters of the alphabet. He can only choose J, H, and R, these three persons. In this case, the power is said to be special because the option is limited by a condition. Thus, if M later on dies, the residential house and lot shall not be included in the computation of the gross estate of the son. Okay? Of course, on the part of B, this residential house will be included in his gross estate. Okay, but that is not the main discussion under this problem. The question here is whether we shall include this property to the gross estate of M when M dies or not. Okay, so since the power here is special, M can only choose between J, H, and R. Therefore, it's as if that M is just a trustee of P's property. It's as if that P is still controlling M on how he should give or how he should transfer this property to third persons. So substantially, M is not the 100% owner of the property because he's only limited to choose between J, H, and R. And that condition actually comes from his father, P. So therefore, M, when M dies, will not include this property in his gross estate. Okay? Because that power is special. Another example, P died leaving his residential house to his only son M with a will, giving the latter a condition that should he die, the son M, he can choose from J, H, R, or to anyone he wants as the next successor of the residential house. In this case, the power is general. What makes this power general is that M, the son, has the right to choose anyone to succeed this property. He can choose J, H, R, A, B, and two other letters of the alphabet. So, therefore, M has the full control and ownership over the disposition and transfer of this property. Therefore, the power is general. So, since the power here is general, when M dies, the residential house will be included in his gross estate. Okay? The next we have is the sale or transfer for inadequate consideration. These are sales or transfers with insufficient or inadequate consideration. So there are actually three scenarios here, and then we'll first begin with the first scenario. If it is a valid sale meaning it is made in good faith, at arm's length, and free from any donative intent, made during the lifetime of the decedent with full and adequate consideration, no amount shall be included in the gross estate. It is a valid sale if it is made in the ordinary course of business. If it is made with full and adequate consideration, no amount shall be included in the gross estate. Example, G, in contemplation of death, again this in contemplation of death, sold his properties to H for 250,000 pesos on November 26, 2019. G died later on December 10, 2019. At first glance, this may be an inclusion or addition to the gross estate, but if the fair market value at the time of sale was 200,000, and the fair market value at the time of death is 400,000, how much would be included in the gross estate? Okay, let's evaluate first. Was it made in good faith? Of course, there is a consideration. And at arm's length, it is free from any donative intent. The fair market value of the property was 200,000 only, but G sold these properties to H for 250,000 pesos, which is higher. The consideration received by G on November 26, 2019 is higher than the actual fair market value at the time of sale. Therefore, it was a valid sale. There is no insufficiency in this scenario. Despite the fact that later on at the time of death, the fair value is already 400,000 despite the insufficiency at the time of death. Then again, at a time of sale, the consideration is valid, is adequate. Therefore, the answer to this question is 0. The sale was a valid sale with sufficient consideration. Again, if it is a valid sale, made in good faith, arm's length, and free from any donative intent, no amount will be included in the gross estate. However, in our second scenario, if it is a sale during the lifetime of the decedent, but the consideration received is less than adequate and there was a donative intent, less than adequate, and there was an intent, donative intent, the amount to be included in the gross estate is the difference between the fair market value at the time of death less the consideration received. Let's have an example. G, in contemplation of death, sold his properties to H for 250,000 pesos on November 26, 2019. G died on December 10, 2019. If the fair market value at the time of sale was 370,000 and the fair market value at the time of death was 300,000, how much would be included in the gross estate? So, hold on. There was a sale, but the sale was made in contemplation of death. So that is actually quite questionable. At the time of sale, the fair market value was 370,000 pesos. But G only sold these properties to H for 250,000 pesos. There was insufficiency in the price, in the consideration. Was there any donative intent? Yes. Why would G sell this property at a lower price despite the fact that the fair value was 370 in contemplation of death? At the time of transfer, there was already an intention to sell this property at whatever price, at even at a lower price, because he is dying. He is contemplating death. Okay? So therefore, this condition less than adequate and there was a donative intent was satisfied. Therefore, there will be a corresponding amount to be added in the gross estate. And how much is that? The difference between the fair market value at the time of death less the consideration received. So the fair market value at the time of death is 300,000 pesos. And the consideration is 250,000 pesos. Therefore, the difference here is 50,000 pesos. That is 300 less 250. So therefore, in determining whether there is insufficiency in the transfer, compare the fair value at the time of sale and the actual consideration. In this case, the 370,000 is the fair value at the time of sale and 250 was the consideration. So we will notice that there was insufficiency already. Okay? Next, when determining how much should be included in the gross estate, compare the fair value at the time of death and the consideration. That is 300 less 250. Okay? Our third scenario, if the transfer made during the lifetime of the decedent is made without consideration, as in the case of in contemplation of death, revocable transfers, and transfer under general power of appointment, the amount to be included in the gross estate is the fair market value at the time of death. Example. So G, in contemplation of death, transferred his properties to H for 250,000 pesos on December 1, 2019. G died on December 10, 2019. There was no consideration. Okay, there was just a transfer. So therefore, our basis here will be the fair value at the time of death. If the fair market value at the time of transfer was 370 and the fair value at the time of death was 300,000, how much would be included in the gross estate? Of course, it's 300,000. It's the fair value at the time of death. Okay, so that's it. Those are the three scenarios under sale or transfer for inadequate consideration. Now let's go to the fifth addition to the gross estate, and that is the proceeds of life insurance. For estate taxation, the following rules shall apply as regards the proceeds of life insurance. Remember, for income tax, the proceeds is never taxable. Okay, but for estate tax, if the beneficiary is any third person other than the estate, executor, or administrator, and the designation is irrevocable, therefore, it is excluded in the gross estate, not included. Okay? If the beneficiary is any third person and the designation is irrevocable, exclude that in our gross estate. Second rule, if the beneficiary is any third person other than the estate, executor, or administrator, but the designation is revocable, again, included in the gross estate, just like in the revocable transfers. And the third rule, if the beneficiary is the estate itself, or the executor or administrator, if the beneficiary is any of these three, regardless whether the designation is revocable or irrevocable, it will always be included in the gross estate. Okay? So first example, Juan took himself a life insurance from Sun Life Insurance in 2015 with a policy value of 2 million pesos. He designated his wife, Maria, and his son, Pedro, as his irrevocable beneficiaries. 5 years later, in 2020, Juan died, and Sun Life gave the beneficiaries the entire proceeds of insurance worth 2 million pesos. The question is, how much should be added in Juan's gross estate? Okay, let us first answer these questions. Who are the beneficiaries? Maria and Pedro. Are these beneficiaries third person? The answer is yes. His wife, Maria, and his son, Pedro, are third persons. They are not the estate, they are not the executors, or the administrators. Therefore, the beneficiaries are third person. Second question, is the designation revocable or irrevocable? The designation is irrevocable. Therefore, the answer to this question is there is nothing to be included in a gross estate of Juan. The entire 2 million is exempted from estate tax. Now let's have a second example. Juan took himself a life insurance from Sun Life Insurance in 2015 with a policy value of 2 million. He designated his wife and his son as his beneficiaries, but such designation is irrevocable in favor of Juan. Therefore, Juan at any time can change or revoke those beneficiaries anytime. 5 years later, in 2020, Juan died and Sun Life gave the beneficiaries the entire proceeds of insurance worth 2 million. So how much should be added in the gross estate of Juan? The beneficiaries here are again third persons, but the designation is revocable. So in this problem, how much should be Juan's gross estate? The answer is the entire 2 million must be included in his estate because the designation is revocable. Now let's have the third example. Juan took himself again life insurance from Sun Life and he designated his executor of his will as his irrevocable beneficiary. 5 years later, in 2020, Juan died and Sun Life gave the beneficiaries the entire proceeds of insurance worth 2 million. How much is to be added in Juan's gross estate? In this case, the beneficiary is his executor. Again, when the beneficiary is the estate itself, or the executor, or the administrator, regardless whether the designation is revocable or not, it will always be added in the gross estate of the decedent. But for third persons, it will matter if revocable or irrevocable. So, the designation in this problem is irrevocable, but then again, it is added in his gross estate because the beneficiary is his executor. Okay? That's it. Those are the 5 additions to the gross estate. I hope you will watch the other videos about other additions to the gross estate. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you're new to this channel, please subscribe, click the bell so you will be notified whenever I will upload new videos. Thank you so much. Bye!